My name is Warren Jaycox. I am the owner-manager of Galaxy of Comics in Van Nuys, California. My first comic was a Spidey Super Stories. I don't exactly remember which issue it was, but it was pretty early. I was probably like 8 or 9. I loved the Electric Company when I was a kid, and they were basically stories from Spidey Super Stories were basically stories from the Electric Company, like old I don't know, old scripts that they hadn't used or whatever. So yeah, I was a big fan. I'm still a big fan of Spider-Man.
What do you remember the comic shop you shopped at as a kid?
Yes, I mean, one of the things you have to understand about, because I'm 44. You have to if you backdate and you figure out when comic book stores started. There were no comic book stores when I started reading comics. I would typically go to like a 7-Eleven, sometimes Thrifty, which at the time was like a well, I'm sure everybody knows what the Thrifties were. Would have them, like in a newsstand type thing, along with magazines and stuff. That's typically how I would buy my comics. We moved to Northern California when I was 12, and when I was about 14, so probably like 83, 84, something like that, a comic book store started in my hometown, and I remember my first comic book store. Yeah, very very well. It was a little professional little plaza, like where dentists and stuff was, and there was an upstairs that they had gotten a small space in, and yeah, there was this just dinky little comic book store that was probably about half the size, probably less, and yeah, it was a great little store, but I mean, it was obviously didn't have any new comics. It had all the old comics on the walls and stuff like that, and a lot of kids and even adults sitting around talking about comics and whatever. But yeah, it wasn't anything like your modern comic book store now. At least I don't think really. So not that I remember. I remember people telling me. Remember people telling me stories like this, and I guess part of it is I think I never really believed that something like this would happen to me. And this was, we had a we had a woman, and it was funny too because it was a Wednesday. It was a Wednesday afternoon. This was probably 4.5 or 5 years ago, and we had a lady come in, busy Wednesday, and she looked a little down, and she told me that her husband had just died, like maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks beforehand, and that they'd been married for like 30 or 40 years, but that she, up until this time, had never known that her husband had been a comic book aficionado, that he had sort of hid it from her. And she didn't know what the explanation was, and he hadn't collected, and I mean, she had been looking through the comics that he had left, and he hadn't collected in probably 20, 25 years. There wasn't even anything, I think, vaguely even from the 90s. It was all 70s, 60s, but then it was also 50s and I mean, the guy had just, collected. And as a comic shop owner, you hear a lot of stories like this. You can, every once in a while someone will come in and say, my uncle has the oldest comic books in the world and he's given them to me and I'm going to bring them to you. And then you find out that, his uncle is literally only 12 years older than him, so they're all 90s books, and you know what I mean? And you hear a lot of stories. But this one just was like, okay. And she said she wanted to bring me the comic book. She didn't want to sell them. She just wanted to know if they were worth anything. And I was like, that's fine, just bring them in. And I distinctly remember telling her, look, Wednesdays are busy, so bring them in tomorrow. And she came back like 2 hours later. So it was still a busy Wednesday afternoon. And, but she had, I want to say, 5 or 6 long boxes of comics. And the good part was she had come in when I was alone and I didn't have any help with me. By the time she came back, I had the evening shift had just gotten there, and I could take a few minutes with her and her boxes, and then I just about like fell on the ground. I mean, it was an amazing collection. It was like I said, 40s, 50s, 60s, and some 70s, and a few 80s, a little bit. And they were all, so much of it was just key stuff. She had the first Silver Age appearance of Flash. She had I don't think she had the first Justice League, but she had like the second or third appearance. I mean, she just had all of these key books, and she just had absolutely no idea whatsoever. But she wanted to know if they were worth anything, and my first reaction was, of course, just hand her $100 and see if she'll go away. My second reaction was, look, this woman just lost her husband, and she, you know what I mean? It was just one of those situations where it's like, I had to tell her the truth, and it was, you can't sell this to anybody. You can't, these are, or at least you can't sell this to any comic book store. No comic book store has cash on hand to just give you what these are really worth. Her husband literally must have read all of these books once, because they were in pristine, beautiful shape. They were, I mean, it's actually an exaggeration to say they were near mint, because some of them might have actually been better than that. The Flash is 105. It was just a beautiful book. I guess that's not the first Silver Age appearance. I have to correct myself. It's technically, I think, the second, but that's the first like reintroduction of the Flash comic book, and she just had beautiful books. Most of them were DC. She also had an Amazing Fantasy 15. Any comic book fan who's never seen one up close, that's a beautiful thing, almost no matter what condition it's in. But yeah, she I sent her away with a good idea of what she had and how much it was worth. And she came back to me. She came back to me twice. First time she came back to me, she basically said, "Listen, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you telling me, all about this, and I've taken it to, I believe she took it to Sotheby's, I believe. I might be wrong. And she sold, and she said, the collection was in the process of selling at Sotheby's or whatever it was, one of these big auction houses. And she couldn't thank me enough, and wanted to know if I wanted anything for my appraisal, and I was like, no, it was no problem, and she was really thankful and whatever. The next time I saw her was probably about 2 months later, and same thing. She came in, she told me, that she had sold it, that she'd made a lot of money on it, and then she pulled out an envelope, that obviously had a comic book in it, and she handed it to me. And this part of the story takes a little bit of backstory. Back in, I want to say this is like from 56 or 57, 1956 or 57, something like that. There's the story of Wonder Woman comics. Wonder Woman number 105 is a little bit of an oddity. They had produced a typical run of Wonder Woman. There's nothing special about the story in any way, shape, or form. But how I understand the story is that they had warehoused pretty much the full run of Wonder Woman 105 in some warehouse somewhere. I think it was back east. I want to say it was New York, but I may be wrong. And that warehouse burnt down. So Wonder Woman 105 has become sort of a weird little holy grail for certain gold and silver age collectors, because the print run, most of the print run was destroyed. It did get distributed, to a number of different areas of the United States, but for the most part, you can't find it. It was a unique item. And I remember when she had brought it to me originally, I had kind of oohed and awed over it because it was such a beautiful copy, and it's just very rare. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Comic books are worth something because they're either a first appearance of somebody, they are in beautiful shape, or they're rare. And this was two of those three things. And I remember just oohing and awing over it, and in this envelope that she handed me this last time I saw her was Wonder Woman 105, and she's like, "This is for you." I'm like, "No." And she's like, "Yeah, seriously, just take it. It's okay." I'm like, "Thank you." It was really, really cool. It was really, really cool. And I know there are a number. I've got a friend who was like, "You're an idiot. You're an idiot. Why didn't you tell her the comics were worth nothing and handed her a couple $100 and just have her go out the door?" And I'm like, because I don't want to take advantage of somebody. That's not what I got into the business for. I got into the business for, because I loved comic books, and I want to spread that love of the business, of the craft, and not to take advantage of people and cheat people out of their collections. And that was a really good example of that karma coming back. I did a good thing. She made a lot of money on it, and she came back and gave me something that I really thought was cool and awesome, and you know what I mean. It was nice. It was a really cool experience. That's probably one of my best experiences in this store so far. If you can walk into a store, like I said, whether it's a comic book store or even a bookstore, and say something like that. Say something like, "Hey, what's good?" My first reaction to somebody coming in and saying that is usually like, "Well, what do you like?" And if they haven't read anything, ever, it's more of like a, "Well, what kind of movies do you watch? What television do you?" Because that's the beauty of comic books right now, is that most of this stuff, it's not capes and boots anymore. It's not exclusively that stuff anymore. It's you can, if you like true crime, you can find a true crime comic. If you like science fiction, there's a science fiction comic. I guarantee you there's something out there that you're going to love, that if you don't even like superheroes, you're still going to find something that you like, that you will read and get really passionate about in this store. That's the beauty of comic books today, is that I couldn't have said that when I was, 12 or 14 or whatever I was when I first walked into a comic book store. If I didn't like capes and boots when I was, 14, I wasn't going to find anything in that comic book store that would have been anything that I could have used. Nowadays, that's not true. If you've never watched a superhero movie or whatever, there's something in this store that I can get you hooked on that is really good, has nothing to do with superpowers or, whatever. It will be the genre that you like and that you can get passionate about. That's beautiful to me. That's fantastic.
That segued into a great great answer for a question.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was going to ask, what's the best part of this for you? Like, what's
that?
Yeah.
That is the best part of it for me. Being able to see someone come in here and say, "Wow, I know nothing about comic books, but I like good fiction. Find me something I'm going to enjoy." And then having them come back, whether it's a day later or a week later, and just being so passionate about what you just put in their hands. You know what I mean? That I love. I loved that. I loved that when I worked at Barnes & Noble. I loved that when I was at the bookstore, and I love that today. That's one of the beautiful parts of this business, is that just introducing somebody to something new and watching their whole demeanor just light up like, "Oh my God, this was amazing, and did you read this? This was incredible." I love that. I love to see that, and it's so cool to be able to introduce something to somebody and see them just, come alive like, "Oh my God, this was amazing." That's such a good experience. I love that about this business.
All right. This is going to be next to last question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the number one versus you would love to see? Like, what is? I'm sure this has been a question in the store before, but
Sure.
Who do you want to see fight?
Uh,
From any book to any book.
the one drawback to being a comic book fan for as long as I've been is that I've pretty much seen everything. No, and it's kind of true. I mean, I mean, for God's sake, there actually is a X-Men versus, or a Avengers versus X-Men book. There's a Civil War book where the entire Marvel universe has gone at each other. I mean, I know DC has done it as well. I mean, there's very little that I haven't seen when it comes to comics. That can sometimes be a bad thing. I mean, sometimes, you can feel a little bit jaded, like, oh God, all right, this is a story I saw in 1992, and now they're doing it over again? Come on. That can sometimes be a drawback. On the other hand, because there is so much, because comics have done so much in the past 15 or 20 years to sort of expand away from their traditional roots of like I said, capes and boots. That there is a lot of there's a lot of places to expand. I mean, I don't know. I can. Here's a really good example. I mean, it's staring at me on the shelf, so it's and it is my recommend. Saga. Saga is a comic book from Image. It's quirky, it's really weird, it's got a great writer and a really good artist, but it sort of exists in this universe that is separate. I mean, you can imagine that it would actually be part of our universe, like, similar to Star Wars. It's a far galaxy, far, far away, you know what I mean? I can actually see some of the properties of some of these companies actually doing a successful, crossover. Actually, I do have another example. There is a horror comic called Nailbiter, which is a fantastic book, again, by Image, basically about serial killers, but it's a little deeper than that. And I could see that property, crossing over with just about anything. And the funny thing is, now they've done it. There's another indie property. I don't believe it was originally an Image property, but it's called Hack Slash. And they've done a Nailbiter Hack Slash one-shot comic, and it was fantastic. It was like, oh, this is so weird, but I see how it works. So I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I would like to see, but I'd be willing to bet that, these companies, specifically, the indie companies, but also DC and Marvel, are probably thinking about that question right freaking now. And they'll provide something really, really cool for us very, very soon.
What are you reading right now? What are your top 3 picks?
Top 3 picks. I don't want to say all Marvel. I am definitely a Marvel guy. So honestly, it's funny. 2 of my 3 top picks just came in this week. Two of them from Marvel. A little book called Miss Marvel, which is a reimagining of a character. Not a reimagining. I mean, she's a brand new character, but the Ms. Marvel character's been around for a while. She's just the sort of the next person, down the line who's adopted the moniker of Miss Marvel. But it's written by I believe she was a novelist before she came to comics, G. Willow Wilson, and it's a fantastic comic book about a teenage girl, in high school, who's gotten powers, and she has to balance, of course, high school. It's very Peter Parker-ish in that way. She's got to balance, high school with her superpowers. She also is Muslim, so she has to balance that with her family and everything. And it's really interesting. She's done a fantastic job. It's also very light. It's very light-hearted and fun and funny. So that is just amazing. It's just really, really well written. The other one is, and I would have never said this even 5 years ago, Thor. And Thor is a woman, I don't know if you that probably dates this. Thor is a woman right now. She probably won't be much longer. But Thor is an actual separate person from the original Thor character, and she is she's taken the moniker of Thor. And it's written by Jason Aaron, who's another absolutely fantastic writer. It's same kind of thing. It's fun and light and funny, but it's also got some very serious parts to it, and it's just super well written. And then I have to admit, probably my favorite outside of that is another Image comic, which is East of West. East of West by Jonathan Hickman is probably the most confusing and complex book I've ever read, and I half the time don't understand at all what the hell is going on, but that's okay. It's one of those books that it's completely okay. There is so much cool, bizarre, interesting and sometimes funny stuff that goes on that it's complex, but it's great, and it's well written, and it's beautiful art, and in a universe, in a world you've never been in and don't recognize at all, but it's Earth. It's great stuff. It's just a super, super amazing book. Those are the 3 books. If those 3 books come out all in the same week, I have a miniature little comic book orgasm. It's awesome.
We'll be editing out the orgasm part.
That's right.